So Monday, April 6th at 6 p.m., I will call to order the meeting of the Winooski City Council.
You have a liquor control meeting first. Sorry.
Oh, I need to find that agenda. Apologies.
Here, I can bring it up. Oh, no, can't bring it up.
I found it.
Yep.
Okay. 6 p.m. Monday, April 6th, I will call to order the Winooski Liquor Control Board. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance led by Deputy Mayor Hal Colston.
I pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America
and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with
liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we have just one regular item for the Liquor Control Board. That is approval of a first-class liquor license renewal for Four Quarters Brewing. Any concerns from staff?
No concerns from staff.
Any questions or concerns from council? Anything from the public? So since we are doing this, we are in video, but kind of by phone, I will ask when we take votes that we state our name and then our position to make it easier for minutes. So I would entertain a motion to approve the first class liquor license renewal for Four Quarters Brewing.
So moved. Jim.
Motion,
so
Jim.
Moved.
Do I hear a second?
Mike Myers seconds.
Second by Mike. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. With that, I would take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Motion by Jim, second by Mike. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. All right. I will now call to order the Winooski City Council meeting. Please join us again in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next up is agenda review. Are there any concerns about the order of items on the agenda? Any concerns from the public? Moving on to public comment. This is a chance for members of the public to speak to any matter that is not included on the agenda. Are there any public comment? Seeing and hearing none, we can move to our consent agenda. So we have 3 items for approval. We have the City Council and Liquor Control minutes from March 16, the St. Stephen's lease, which we discussed at that same meeting, and City Manager's review. I drafted a summary of the review that we did in executive session to enter into the public record. Are there any questions or concerns about the consent agenda? Questions from the public? Seeing and hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved, Amy.
Second, Hal.
Motion by Amy, second by Hal. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. We will move on to council reports then. Amy, can I start with you?
Sure, I don't have anything to report.
Jim.
Yep, I was pleased to attend the online gathering of the Winooski Tree Board on Thursday. We talked about adjustments to our Arbor Day celebration plan for the May plantings. Talked about different ways we could use some techniques to still get some engagement around trees in the city. but respecting the social distancing needs. But it's very exciting to have that group get together because we were notified not too long ago that we received our Tree City USA designation. So we did become one of a handful of communities in Vermont who are now Tree City USA designated, and we're pretty excited. Even though we can't properly celebrate at this time, it's still a huge accomplishment for the city. So I was psyched to see that come through.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jim. Mike.
Yes, I am currently working with the Winooski Food Shelf in J&J's Corner Market. Jocelyn and John Barton are business owners. In fact, the Barton families had a business in the same location for over 50 years. And they currently are a food drop-off spot for the Winooski Food Shelf. And I've come up with an idea of maybe doing a Winooski Food Shelf challenge. If people would consider going to John's Market to buy $25 worth of groceries, John Barton and his wife will throw an extra $5 of groceries into, I'm calling them Johnny's Food Shelf grab bags. I talked to Linda Howe from the Food Shelf, and she thought it was a great idea because the food shelf supplies are dwindling very fast. In fact, last week, the amount of people that went through the food shelf doubled. They had 90 families show up. And Linda's expecting it to grow even more throughout this crisis. So this is for the month of April. I'm challenging city staffers, my fellow counselors and the mayor, and anyone else that's listening, if they want to do a monetary donation to J&J's Corner Market, that he will produce a Johnny's grab bag for the food shelf and help out a supply that's really dwindling. And I think it's a real need. So they don't necessarily have to go there and shop themselves. Linda, myself, and John have all talked, and we know exactly what's needed there. There's a lot of toiletries that are just like everyone else. A lot of toiletries are needed, and the amount of food that's going through there. The bigger supermarkets are helping out, but I kind of like to keep some of this business local, and I think J&J's Corner Market is a great spot. It's very accessible. It's right on Mallets Bay Avenue, by the O'Brien Center, and I'm leading by example. I did 2 of them. I donated $50 to John, and John threw in $10 extra worth of food. So I'm calling it the Winooski Food Shelf Challenge. And if we get successful at this, I'm going to see if John and Linda want to do this for the month of May as well. And that's it.
Thanks, Mike. Hal.
So I just want to share with the council and the staff, as well as everyone else listening, that if you have any concerns or cares about our current crisis as it relates to our state in terms of our policies and laws, that you contact me with your questions or concerns, and I pass them on to Representative Ann Pugh, who is our point person for the legislature to connect with the executive branch, the governor and his staff. We're trying to, keep this as efficient as possible so we don't have 10 different people calling the governor's office with the same issue. So if you have a concern or a question, let me know and I'll pass it along.
Thank you, Hal.
Okay.
I have continued to meet weekly along with Jesse and staff with community leaders to discuss surfacing needs or ways we can help each other out. Also participating in a weekly call from the state updating municipal leaders. We will hear more in the agenda, the regular agenda item on our COVID response. Also hosted a Facebook Live event with Jesse. Got a couple of questions there, but it sounds like there's been more views after the fact than when we went live to get some more information out to the community. And I also want to share, if you haven't seen this yet, the state released modeling on what they currently are anticipating for like the peak of cases. and the capacity for our healthcare system to respond. The short story there is that us staying home and following the guidance that has been given is working. We could, if we maintain that, not be in a crisis situation as some other cities that have been overwhelmed. But we have to continue to obey these orders and stay home and social distance as much as possible in order to make sure that doesn't happen. I think they are predicting that we will reach peak cases late April, early May. So that's something to think about as well, that we are definitely going to be staying home for the duration of the month, and potentially longer. That information was shared through Vermont Digger. They did like a live session. You can also see the modeling on there if you want to look that up. With that, I will pass it off to Jesse for city updates.
Great, thank you. First, thank you all for doing the meeting through this new technology. I think we're all in a brand new time, so appreciate your flexibility. So I'm going to give you a couple of updates, but I'm not going to talk right now about our response to COVID-19. I will hold that for that agenda item. So I wanted to, as you know, we got a municipal planning grant this year to forward our historic preservation goals as a community. Heather issued an RFP for the consultant to do that work, and that contract has been awarded to VHB, who obviously has a lot of experience in the city. And one of our residents is the point person through VHB with a lot of expertise. So we're really excited to have them on board. We are looking at, because that contract involved a lot of public process and data gathering, we are of course trying to figure out how to adjust that to move the project forward, but be in compliance with the governor's social distancing orders. Heather, anything else on that you want to mention?
No, just that I'm excited to work with VHB. Their proposal was far and away the best, and we definitely have already been discussing ways that we can move forward.
One other thing on the community development front and the housing development front, 223 East Allen Street, which is another mixed income project, much like Casavan Overlook, was awarded this round of low income tax credits this funding cycle. That's huge news for the city. It's $900,000 in tax credits that they were awarded to move forward that mixed income development. So that's right across the street from Casavan up East Allen Street. That project is fully permitted, and the developer anticipates being under construction this year, assuming we all can move forward at some point. But really good news, developers we know or have relationships within the city are very conscientious to code and development standards. And of course, the mixed income housing within one building is aligned to the city's strategic vision. And then finally, I wanted to give you an update that Chief Hebert and I continue to work with the Department of Corrections and the community justice centers surrounding us here in Chittenden County. As many of you know, Eli, the director of the CJC, left city employment a few weeks ago. And with that shift and the conversations the Chief and I have been having with the community justice community over the last years, really presents an opportunity to move incrementally towards some regionalization to continue to maintain good restorative justice practices here in the city, but do it in a way that may be a little more efficient in the use of the tax dollars. So we are working with DOC to put together a proposal for that, and we'll likely be bringing you an MOU to partner with one of our surrounding CJCs in the next month or two. So just wanted that to be on your radar. And other than that, I will hold the rest of our updates for later agenda items. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. With that, we will move on to our regular items. The first item on the agenda is approval of the Arbor Day resolution. Any intro on that, John?
So I think I'll probably pass along to Jim, but just to say that to have the celebration on May 1st, as Jim mentioned, it's going to look a lot different than it did last year, but really I think one of the main points is to kind of celebrate what trees bring to the city and, what positive impacts they have for the community. So with that, I'll let Jim kind of chime in.
Sure. Thanks, John. And thanks for putting this together and getting it on the agenda. The Arbor Day celebration has been happening for over 100 years, and it is one of the older celebrations of trees in the country, but it's been pretty widely accepted as just a way to take a day and promote and recognize all that trees are doing for us in the city. And we're lucky that leaves are starting to pop right now. It's going to change the way that our cities look and hopefully make being isolated a little less isolating here in the city. And we really are lucky to have good street trees and good public trees and good private trees in this city. So I'm excited to see this Arbor Day proclamation supporting that. And as mentioned, it will be different this year, but we're also going to get leniency on the celebration part of it in terms of applying for future Tree City USA designation. So they're not trying to make people actually get together. But as I mentioned, there's other ways that we can celebrate trees throughout the year. And we're still pretty optimistic we'll be able to plant more trees in the coming year. And this celebration and proclamation really helps us affirm that commitment as a city and as a community.
Thanks, Jim. Any questions, concerns from council? Any questions from the public? So that's May 1st, right? You said Arbor Day, May 1st? All right. Look forward to seeing how we sort of virtually celebrate that. I would entertain a motion to approve the Arbor Day resolution.
So moved. Jim.
Second.
Motion by Jim, second by Hal. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Hi.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Next up is another item for approval. This is FY20 audit engagement letter with RHR Smith with Angela.
Yep, RHR Smith reached out to me. They are ready to conduct pre-audit, which will be being done remotely this year. We had a really good experience with them last year, and their RFP award was for a potential 3-year contract. So we recommend going with them again this year.
Thanks, Angela. And this is sort of a standard procedure where we as council approve the audit firm and their approach so that they can move forward with that work. So I think, in our packet, we had the letter that sort of outlined what it is that they are doing for this audit for us. Are there any questions from council? Any questions from members of the public? So seeing and hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the FY20 audit engagement letter with RHR Smith.
So moved, Amy.
Motion by Amy, second by Mike. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. So that brings us to discussion, potential approval item, our COVID-19 operations update, financial impact, and policy options, which Jesse will lead in for us.
Great. So I'm going to start. There's a bunch of information in your packet. So just by way of high-level overview, you have a memo from me and the leadership team outlining kind of operationally where you are. You have a memo from Angela outlining some potential financial modeling, and then you have a memo from the mayor outlining some state and federal resources, as well as comments on this team or on the policy recommendations. So I'm going to walk through our memo relatively quickly, and then ask Angela and the mayor to jump in as well. And then we'd really like to have a discussion about how you all would like to move forward. There are some policy options for you and some where we'd love to hear from you, different data requests or information requests you'd like to see. But just to start, and I know that you probably have read a lot of this already, but because this is is broadcast on Channel 17 and will be on the website, I do want to give a little more of a summary of where we currently are. So I want to start first and foremost by saying this is an unprecedented time in our community and in our state and in our country and in our world. And I really want to thank the leadership team and the staff at the city who, through just an enormous amount of change and upheaval and some personal exposure, have really rallied and had amazing attitudes and kept going, kept the work of the city moving forward, kept their professionalism, kept their kind of eye on us as a community getting through this and being as strong as we can coming out the other side of it. So just thanks to all the leadership team and the teams behind them as well. So from again, just walking through kind of where we are today. So as you know, on March 13th, less than a month ago, we took our first actions in response to COVID-19 by shutting the Winooski Senior Center and postponing policy commission meetings. Very shortly after that, on March 18th, following the governor's direction, we closed down all city buildings to the public. We have taken a number of other steps to help flatten the curve and slow the transmission of COVID-19. So all buildings are closed to the public. We're operating city services on minimum staffing levels. All of those folks who can work from home are working from home. A huge thanks to the council for the investment you made last year, or the council last year made in technology. Because of that, all of the leadership team has VPN access and can pretty much do their jobs remotely with some public safety exceptions in there. So that's really been able to keep us going to a great extent. As you probably know, we've waived all on-street parking costs and enforcement in the hopes of trying to support our small business community. I think we'll continue to delay our policy advisory commissions, but more to come on that. You all are continuing to meet and will do so on a regular basis and an emergency basis as needed. We've also seen a bunch of service changes. So we have suspended all non-emergency code residential and commercial inspections. Dog licenses, while they are due, there is no late penalty for the month of April. We've discontinued all utility connections for lack of utility payment for the quarter. That's a question mark for you all if you want to continue to do that into future quarters. The Winooski Memorial Library, while it is closed, is doing curbside pickup, so can call in requests and pick them up. We are doing all zoning and building permit submittals either electronically or through the Dropbox at City Hall, and really trying to push residents to do as much business online as they can. Ray and his team have worked with residents and stood up a centralized volunteer portal for the city. So if people are interested in volunteering, they can go to the city's website /volunteer and fill out the forms there. That while that is very important and we're very thankful to all the residents who have stepped forward, also really want to highlight the governor's volunteer portal. That's very important for a level of volunteering that we at the city level are not supporting at this time. Meals on Wheels is continuing service operations. There have been some adjustments to that, but meals are getting out to folks through AgeWell and through the senior center. And we anticipate some potential additional changes. Those requests for those services are increasing. Obviously, with the senior center closed, we are still trying to stay connected to our seniors and make sure that those in our community who would like to be in contact with us can remain in contact. So Barb has set up basically office hours where she is doing direct outreach to seniors connected to us, just checking in, talking, how are they doing, whatnot, and also providing that information out so people who are in need or have questions about services can call into her as well. I think you all saw an email from me on this, but very sad to say that with the stay safe, stay home order, that construction on the Myers Memorial Pool has stopped for the time being. So that's kind of where we are operationally as a city. I want to highlight a couple of communications and outreach efforts we have done. The mayor mentioned a few. We also have recorded a message on the snow line for our friends and neighbors who aren't online or don't use our website regularly. with an update on city services and how they can get access. We've been doing regular updates. Paul has been a rock star at pulling together information. You will also know we have a dedicated page on our website to COVID-19, local and state and federal resources, as well as kind of our regular updates of information that are coming in. He's also, if you haven't been on that site in the last couple of days, on the right-hand information column, he's built a resource center trying to directly link people to state and federal resources by question area. So again, trying to get folks there as quickly as possible. And he's just shared that website in the chat feature if you haven't been there. Ray has been participating in the Vermont Multilingual Coronavirus Task Force and bringing our updates to that group. That is a incredibly powerful group that has stood up very quickly to ensure that as much information is pushed out through appropriate translations as possible. So we have those resources on our website, and Ray is working with them to ensure that our Winooski specific messages are also getting out. Huge thanks to the school district for also their help in that. The mayor mentioned the leadership briefings that we have weekly with faith leaders, business leaders, housing leaders from across the city. And finally, from a municipal operations perspective, we're really trying to stay, even though we're not together as a team, stay connected as a team. So the leadership team is doing daily check-ins, kind of a virtual emergency operations center, to make sure that we're all on the same page and are sharing information as quickly as possible. The daily updates are sent directly to the staff so they know what's going on a day-to-day basis. We've had 2 all-staff meetings since the middle of March, and I continue to try and push out information to staff as much as possible. And certainly the department heads are doing an enormous amount of work with their teams as well, really checking in on everyone, making sure people are healthy, have the information they need. I'm going to stop there really quickly before kind of we move on to the implications part of this conversation, and just see if anyone has any questions about operations and how we're kind of functioning as an organization at the moment.
Yes, I have a question actually.
Yeah.
It has to do with the pool. Did the hiring process for any employees for the pool start yet? And what kind of implications is this going to have with the delay, if there was?
Yeah. So why don't we just jump right into that? Rauscher, do you want to talk about schedule implications, and then Phoebe talk about hiring?
Sure. So as Jesse mentioned, with the shutdown, the projected construction end date has pushed approximately 3 weeks. So the original target was early June. So now the target, assuming construction restarts the 15th, is end of June. So, you know, we're monitoring that. If the governor extends the stay home, stay safe deadline, which sounds like it may be coming, that will impact schedule further. So that's kind of where we're at right now with the schedule.
John, you said they're going to start up again in April 15th after the deadline, or is it May 15th? I didn't catch that.
April 15th.
April 15th.
It's based on the last information when the stay home, stay safe.
Which will probably move anyway. Okay.
Right.
So basically they won't, I mean, I heard pretty clearly from the governor's press conference today that they will be extending that order. They just haven't said the date yet. So it will be extended until that order is undone. So I think June 24th at this point, while that's the best available information we currently have, is unlikely. Phoebe, do you want to talk about hiring?
Yes, so we have started the hiring process. We've posted the positions for pool attendant, and I think we'll just communicate proactively with candidates about the timeline and the possibility that it might change. But, and I don't know if Ray, if you want to speak to this as well, but we're prepared to do interviews via Zoom if we need to, and be a little bit flexible with the traditional hiring process if we need to do that.
Yeah, not much to add there. I think, again, we're gonna, move forward if we have a good pool of candidates. See how it goes, and again, just be flexible as the dates are likely to continue to move a little bit in the next couple of weeks.
I think one of the things that the leadership team is thinking about, so without knowing when we're going to be out of this state, a lot of these timelines and models are really high level estimates. I think the reality for us is if this gets pushed back from the middle of April into the middle of May or June, we are looking at a construction season through the summer to finish the pool, which is going to have pretty significant financial implications for us because we will need to start paying on that debt without having had any operation fees to help cover it. So we have not done that modeling yet because we don't know the timeline implications, but that is something to keep in the back of your minds as well.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. The other thing I was wondering if it did get delayed in the pool, if we decide not to open the pool this year, or if the pool gets opened at, say, August and runs for 2 months, has there been any contact with the YMCA to maybe have them jump in instead of hiring people at this point? Is that a conversation someone's having or a thought process?
Yeah.
So we've been working to negotiate the lifeguarding contract with the YMCA. They were the lone bidder on that project. So while we haven't talked about them running the front desk, that's been something we've stayed pretty consistent with so far, at least, that we would have city staff doing that. It's an interesting question, Mike. If it's a much shorter season, would we consider, just contracting with them as we used to? I think it's certainly a valid question and something we could look into for sure. We haven't had that conversation yet, though.
Because I know it might be difficult to hire someone late in the season, especially if they're college students and they're headed back to college. So is this something I want someone to be thinking about?
No, it's a great suggestion. We'll certainly talk to them about what options exist.
Okay, thank you.
Any other kind of operations questions, or Jim?
So I was curious what's being done around recreational spaces. So we did have the resident email about the skate park, and I was out yesterday and saw about 6 people playing basketball at the school. So I'm just curious if there's been any discussion about how to kind of control those spaces to ensure that the order is being followed.
Yep. No, great question. So we are in the process right now of putting signage up. Alicia was out today in our parks and is going to finish that process up tomorrow. Paul and I are also working to put together a daily update for tomorrow that will update folks on which parks are open, sort of a high level description of social distancing practices for folks. And I think, not unlike a lot of things, we're continuing to see trends within the rec industry evolve over time. So I think we're trying and other rec departments in the region are making adjustments. So Alicia and I had a quick conversation today and have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow to talk about whether we're going to consider a more full-on closure of the skate park and then kind of gathering spots. So but we've made some calls, like we're not putting up tennis nets right now. We taped off today playground structures and swings. So we're trying to do our best to send those signals to folks that these are not spaces they should be gathering in. But again, knowing we're down staff and not as prevalent in the parks as we often are with eyes and ears. So I don't know if that answers some of those questions for you, Jim. I mean, again, I think it's kind of a moving target a little bit, but we're seeing things close down more and more. And I think we'll probably follow suit with that.
Hey, Ray, can I jump in? Have you guys worked with the school district too on their playgrounds and basketball courts up there? Is the city talking to the school district about that as well?
We have not, Mike, and that's a great question. I can certainly drop Sean a line and see what they're doing. I was up there today to pick up Hattie's school materials and didn't notice, any things being taped off or anything, but that may be something we should encourage them to do as well, just to kind of have consistency across the city. It's a great call.
And I think, let me ask the question, would it be all right if I reached out to St. Francis School and kind of stated the same guidelines as what the city's doing for playgrounds? Because I know they have a playground there too. Is that something you would like me to do, or does the city want to call?
I'm happy to do that as well. If I'm already going to be calling Sean, I'm happy to call Eric as well and have that conversation.
All right, Christine, shall I keep walking through this?
Yeah, I do think that we should hear the financial update before we talk about policy options.
Okay, sounds good. So just a couple of other project implications. We obviously have talked about the pool. Lot 7D, we are continuing working with them very closely. We have 2 meetings a week with them. They have not, at this point, shown any delay as a result of COVID. Having said that, I think Heather and I are both anticipating, processes taking longer, permitting taking longer, financing taking longer, given the financial climate. So we have no negative news to share at this point, and we are continuing to work with them very closely, but anticipate that there might be some changes. We are also considering, given that not issuing a summer bond issuance for the funds to construct the parking, but wait until the winter for that. We think with the financial modeling currently in place, we have, we'll be well positioned to carry us through the fall and wait that winter bond issuance. The Winooski High School redevelopment project, the Winooski School redevelopment project, not high school. We are moving forward with our zoning review of that project this week. The Development Review Board will meet on the 16th, as you probably know. So I will pause my memo there before we talk about policy options and ask Angela to walk us through the financial models kind of implications she has put together. I will say by way of intro, so she does not have to say this, there is a ton of unknowns right now. So I gave her some parameters in which to model, but we're happy to talk through the assumptions we've made, but there are just a lot of unknowns at the moment. So Angela.
All right. First, our biggest concern with regard to finances was the amount of cash flow. Because we are close to the public, we're not seeing the normal flow of revenues into the city. So we have made some efforts to make sure that we have cash flow on hand. We had a CD that matured that we have not reinvested and is available to be used. And we've drawn down on all of our outstanding loans projects that needed to be reimbursed. So we are current on all of that. So we've influxed about $1 million worth of cash into our general fund to make that available in the short term. With regard to the financial modeling that I completed, it is a worst case financial model, which has negative impacts to our revenues, no changes to our operations, and additional costs factored in for COVID-19 not being offset by any other funding source, no FEMA money, no grants. So this is a worst case scenario. The biggest impacts in the forecast were obviously property taxes. We used a delinquency rate of about 20%, which was nearly an $800,000 deficit to the revenue. That is a number that is a complete estimate. Our worst case in historical actuality has been like 4% delinquency rate. So this is out of the realm of our records. Local option tax, we are anticipate having that come in $112,000 under our previous forecasts due to reduced business transactions and requests from businesses for waiver or delays of payment. Parking tickets are anticipated to be down due to the reduced enforcement and the free on-street parking. And we have some grants that we're not going to be able to draw down based on the activities that those grants support are not occurring currently. We also use the 20% delinquency rate for the water and wastewater fees. On-street parking, because of the on-street being free, we anticipated no revenues for 2 months for on-street fees. For the Community Service Programs Fund, we anticipated no additional revenues through the end of the year because those programs cannot currently operate. And then we saw a reduction in revenue of about $40,000 to the rental registry program for inspections that cannot be done because they're deemed non-essential. So we've also anticipated no additional payments for permits. Even though we are still seeing some applications come in, this was the worst case scenario. Moving waking windows to the fall, which is something that was proposed, would mean that there's very little event permit revenue this year. And then because fingerprinting program has not yet been stood up, we would receive no revenue from that program this year. So with all of those things taken into consideration, the general fund would need to dip into our reserves by about $900,000. As delinquent property taxes are received, those reserves could be replenished. However, if delinquent taxes are abated at the Board of Abatement, we would not be able to replenish those.
One other sentence to just add to that is Angela has put into place extremely good tracking mechanisms for not only staff time working on COVID items, but also new expenditures that are as a result of COVID-19. So, and Heather and Angela and John Audie are all tracking different potential FEMA reimbursement options and things like that. So I think we are positioned to get some money back. We have no idea what the level of that is, but we have set up systems in place. So when those opportunities present, they'll be ready to go.
Well, and also the best case scenario, even if we were, they don't reimburse 100%, right? So what we spend on disaster, even if we got like reimbursed for everything we spent, it wouldn't be the full amount. So there is going to be some loss there.
Yeah, currently FEMA is under Category B. It's 75% reimbursable, and it's a fairly narrow window of what's reimbursable. But as Jess said, we're tracking everything, and we'll see where this all goes. It will probably, the scope of what they're willing to reimburse will hopefully broaden. I think all the communities are in the same boat. So, but yes, currently Category B is a 75% reimbursement.
So I think Hal has his hand raised.
Yes. So Angela, if there were a best case scenario, what might it look like in terms of getting funding from the federal government and the various programs they're offering?
So I would need some additional information. We've been tracking time for programs that are reimbursable, such as meal distribution. So Ray and his team have been spending a lot of time distributing meals. That time is reimbursable under the FEMA at 75%. So there'd have to be a lot of calculations done with that. Actual invoices out the door, we've only spent about $700 on invoiceable items. Most of what we're going to be seeking reimbursement on is going to be staff time.
Okay. Thank you.
I got a question. Angela, if, again, with the pool, I hate to keep bringing the pool up, but if we're going to start paying on something that we can't open, is there any opportunity there for us to get federal money to back that up, or any deferments from the bond? Do we know any of those questions?
So the bond bank hasn't announced any sort of deferments with regard to their general obligation bonds. Those are offered on the public market and have pretty strict guidelines around them. We aren't even allowed to prepay them when we have money available to do so. So I don't think we'll see any sort of forgiveness from the bond bank. with regard to FEMA reimbursement, this isn't directly related. In addition, we have already set aside the money for the pool out of this worst case impact. That is all set aside and ready to be paid. So that would not be in addition to anything here.
And I think that would go for anything either. I mean, any future layoffs from the city. I mean, is there any forgiveness or any income coming in federal wise if that has to happen?
So let me take a stab at this, but Phoebe, gonna look to you to back me up on that. So there's a couple of different things that I've heard of being talked about the state and federal level to support employees and to support organizations. So currently in one of the last federal stimulus packages, there is a direct to support to municipalities over 500,000 people. And then in my understanding in Vermont is that those funds go to the state because obviously there's no city over 500,000 people and are distributed that way. So I think there will be some relief coming out of the state for municipalities. Secondly, as you've probably been hearing, if we lay folks off or furlough folks and they apply for unemployment, there are some benefits the employees would be eligible for. There is also a new federal Family Medical Leave Act amendment in response to COVID, which if we have employees that are impacted and go out on that FMLA leave, we may get some payroll tax return funds on. But so I think there are some options out there, but they are very unknown at this point how they might impact us. Phoebe, do you want to add anything there?
Nothing to add. I think, yeah, just reiterating that there's some direct relief, but it's mostly going to employees who are impacted right now. But I think it's something that there is a possibility that if more, stimulus funds, more things are passed that might benefit small employers or municipalities in particular. That's something we're keeping an eye on.
Angela, for the calculation in lost revenues, what time is that through the end of FY, assuming lost revenues through the end of this fiscal year, or what time period did you estimate?
So I ran the modeling all the way through the end of the fiscal year, but the lost revenue was generally anticipated to end in mid-May.
Okay, so for me, we're saying like $300,000 modeled in lost revenue through mid-May. I feel confident saying we are staying home into May. And even when that order is lifted, there will be sort of it's not going to be business as usual right out the gate, right? There's going to be a trickle effect getting back to normal. So I personally, when I look at these numbers, I think that could be higher and we should be keeping pretty conservative estimates around that.
So you'd like us to model it like we're not back in business this fiscal year?
I don't know about this fiscal year, but I don't think that mid-May we will be back at getting the local options tax that we expected.
This model assumed no local options tax collected at all for 2 months. It didn't include a delay or a reduction. It was just $0 for 2 months.
Okay. Okay.
I actually do think that's reasonable, considering that we get about almost twice as much sales tax revenue as rooms, meals, and alcohol tax revenue. Some of that is continuing. Some of I think Beverage Warehouse is doing a pretty good business right now. So there is some local options tax continuing. So I think a full 2 months not receiving anything is trying to be conservative, but certainly I hear what you're saying. I actually think, Christine, that impact may be more felt on the parking and programming front, as people kind of slowly come out of their homes. So good point, and we will try and be very clear about the assumptions we're making.
And Angela, can you remind me when Q1 property taxes would be due for the next fiscal year?
The Q1 property taxes are due on August 15th.
So it might be a good time to transition into the reserve sheet that you put together and how these impacts are weighed into that.
So the reserve sheet is kind of an amalgamation of the previous reserve sheet that I have built for you in the past, but combined with the impacts that we're seeing from this modeling. So we start off with the reserves as of June 30th, 2019. Anything that is truly restricted by either some sort of contract or legal requirement. There's a column for what we need to cover our actual operations in FY20 based on the modeling that was completed. And then we had a few budgets that have a negative budget approved in FY21 where we would also need to dip into those reserves. And so then the final column is the reserves that we'll have available after all of those things have been applied.
So I do want to acknowledge, you know, the roughly $1 million that you've been able to come up with in liquid cash from the CD and other resources. It is just really fortuitous timing. If we are going to see delayed payments in property taxes. What I gather from this sheet is that building in those assumptions that assumed delayed or lost revenue, we have about $15,000 in unrestricted funding here. There is money in the wastewater, water, and parking, but that has to stay there, right? So if we were thinking about, do we need to get creative with financing, we don't have a lot to work with if that delayed and lost revenue comes to be.
So you might have a little bit more than that. If you look down in Fund 700, the operating reserve fund, there's 251,000. Of that 251,000, only 187,000 of that is earmarked for reappraisal. So there is about 70,000 there that is not assigned, that's available for use.
That is a good catch. Thank you. I had not interpreted that way.
Do we anticipate the reappraisal would be pushed back?
I think we will be under an obligation from, assuming we come out of this in the next couple of months, I think we would be under an obligation through the state and the ed fund to start working on that, you know, to show progress there. I don't think we'll be in homes this year, but I think we would need to enter into a contract.
So I guess how much of that reserves would we feel comfortable using if we needed to?
I don't think I have enough information to answer that right now.
I honestly wouldn't touch anything that we've previously assigned to the reappraisal, but the other 61,000 that is unassigned in that fund is definitely open and available. If there's something that the council was thinking about, we could model.
I very much appreciate and always try and give you all conservative estimates. I do want to go back to a point Angela made earlier. You know, the vast majority of the use of these reserves are in delinquent property tax payments. You know, that's pretty much the entire general fund use of reserves. I think it's, unless the council chooses to give direction to the BCA to forgive property taxes at a pretty high rate, I think that 20% number is a very high number for us never to collect property taxes. I think we very well may not collect them in May and perhaps not in June or July, but I think eventually we will collect more than 80% of those due property taxes.
And just confirming here, it says needed to cover FY20. That's FY20 through mid-May, or FY20 through June 30?
Through June 30.
Okay.
Well, and something else that we need to keep in mind is if there's to be impact on the FY21 budget, and how low are we willing to deplete reserves overall? Are there any more questions around the finances before we pivot to policy?
I just have a comment to make. I wonder, or I guess a question. I wonder if we look back to the 2008 Great Recession, how did the city react to that downturn? It's obviously not apples and oranges to what we're going through now, but I'm just wondering, and that doesn't have to be answered now, but I'm just wondering if there's any thought about looking into that history to see what was done and how we weathered it.
So I have looked at our history. It's something that I often have to provide for debt applications. We as a city have a very, very low property tax delinquency rate. In a general year, our property tax delinquency is less than 1%. And we would see in our worst year, which was around 2008, 4%. So the best practices for GFOA recommended doubling your worst year. We thought that that was a little too low, and that's why we decided to go with a higher 20% rate.
Thank you.
So Christine, do you want me to walk through these policy steps?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So the mayor asked us to, in advance of this meeting, do some high-level thinking about policy actions you all could take to try and limit the negative impact on Winooski residents and businesses. So I've outlined those on page 4 of our memo to you. So first is, property taxes we've been talking about. So the deadline for the fourth quarter property taxes is May 15th. Those are on current property tax bills. We cannot change those. However, you could act to delay the penalties for non-payment until June 15th. Talking to my manager colleagues across the state, many communities are considering that. If you wanted to do that, what we would recommend is that you pass an emergency ordinance saying that for this situation, and we could bring that to you on the 20th at your meeting on the 20th. I do think it's important to note that, and apologies if this is way too basic for you all, but the city collects the school or the education and municipal property taxes. If we delay any payment on, or if we, forgive any delayed payment on those, we as the city still have the obligation to give the money to the ed fund, which means essentially the city would be fronting money to the school that we hadn't yet collected, and dealing with the cash flow of that. So just a impact to keep in mind. The next step the next option you have after delaying penalties for non-payment is what traditionally happens if folks don't make their tax payments and don't go to the BCA for some abatement, is we start a tax sale process with them where we look to move forward with collecting the revenue through sales. You could pass an emergency ordinance delaying, saying essentially the city would take no action towards a tax sale for COVID-related non-payment reasons through FY21, which would essentially give reassurance to residents that that would not be a risk for them. I mentioned earlier that we had suspended utility shutoffs for this quarter. That can be extended into future quarters. The city could suspend any late fees for non-optional services done with the city. And then you could pass a resolution that the mayor has provided in your packet to advocate for other government partners supporting our residents in other ways. One other thing that we did not call out here because we don't necessarily think it's a policy action you need to take, but we wanted to run it by you tonight was we will be printing fourth quarter water bills next or third quarter on Wednesday. Traditionally, we set, we issue those by April 15th with a due date of May 15th to coincide with the property tax payments. That is a deadline that we administratively have the ability to set. So our inclination was to print those tax bills this week with a due date of June 15th to just give that extra 30 days to make those payments. So again, I think that's something administratively we have the power to do, the statute authority to do, but wanted to check in with you all through this conversation if that was something you were interested in. So those are that's the policy summary.
Thanks. And to add to that, the memo I included in this packet outlines at a high level some of the relief being offered to residents and businesses by state and federal sources. I will say that we are generally in line with what other communities in Vermont and across the nation are doing from research I've been looking at. I included a couple of items that are sort of more creative steps that cities have taken that I'm not certain that we have the resources to do, but just wanted to throw that out there that we can think creatively here. But what Jesse just laid out are things that we know we have the authority to do that could have some impact for our community.
Jesse, can I ask a couple questions about the tax sales? First, just curious, how many of those do we typically have in a calendar year, if any? And second, is it just that someone would miss one property tax payment, or is there a threshold?
Yeah. Can I actually ask Angela or Janet to answer this? Janet is like the queen of delinquent property tax payments. So let you guys shine here. It's a good question, Amy.
As far as I know, we've only had 2 tax sales, right?
So we sold 4 properties at tax sale in my entire 15 years with the city.
And about how many payments do they usually have to be late on?
So you only have to be late on one payment. If you ignore all of the warnings, you would go to tax sale. Generally, we don't do that until somebody is a couple of years in arrears.
Thank you.
Jess, I got a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, I've been thinking about this. I think I talked to you about this last week. With everyone staying home and people not going to businesses or schools, the water and sewer bills are going to go up probably quite a bit. Has there been any talk about the water district and having some relief on cost of water? Has there been any word from the government if they're going to help people out, knowing that there's more people at home, more laundry being done, just more water being used? and more sewer being used. It may impact some people's budgets, and I'm wondering if there's been any conversation about that.
So I did ask John to think about this question in advance, so I'll ask him to jump in here.
Yeah, Mike, so we've chatted with Champlain Water District, that's where we purchase our portable water from. Right now there's nothing currently in the works for reduction. I mean, ultimately we're actually the client of theirs. And I haven't heard anything state or federally to support that water reduction. So just to give you some quick numbers, I mean, so quarterly billing for a typical 3-bedroom house, water and sewer, it's about $140 for the quarter. And actually, Ray, I'm using your average value because you're closest to my household size. So, and we don't know what that increase is going to look like yet. So, I mean, if you assume a 20% increase, say that's going to be $30. But we're going to be keeping an eye out to see what that looks like.
Yeah, because I'm just curious about the people that live on a budget, such as retirees, seniors, even some of the lower income folks, and just I think it needs to be brought out there, and if people can save somewhere, anywhere will help at this point. Thank you.
Ask a kind of related question. Well, first, I do want to express strong support for continuing to a moratorium on shutoffs for water and sewer. I think when we're asking people to wash their hands more and stay home, that we need to make that water, I think, more of as a right than a privilege. So I hope that we can continue that for as long as needed. If we expect to see some delinquency in the water bills, my concern about delaying payment is that we will have a longer time during which we won't know how much our delinquency will be. And is there any benefit to delaying payment when people won't receive a shutoff or any interest load as a result of non-payment? Could we rather just advertise the fact that they won't get a water shutoff as long?
So there is still a penalty and interest that accrues on utility bills after they are not paid by the due date.
Could we waive those instead of delaying payment dates?
So hold on, can I go back to your initial question for a minute? So you were making the argument that don't delay the payment because we may not know what to Mike's point, what the impact on those households are if we delay that. Is that what you were saying to begin with?
And I'm also thinking about if we need to prepare a municipal response because we end up seeing a 25 or 30% delinquency rate that pushes our reserve, like that has an impact we're not anticipating. That's more my concern, is that our indicator then pushes back by a month and we don't know if people are just not going to pay or if they're just waiting an extra month because they have an extra month.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about it that way, and I think the same could be said on the property tax side of things as well. I think the reality is either way, we're going to issue the bill, so we're going to know what the usage, any changes in the usage. So that it's up to you whether we ask them to pay by mid-May. I think the idea of the delayed payment was if folks are out of work and not working in May, asking them to pay in May is a challenge. But that's, I think at this point it's up to you guys. In terms of waiving the interest, can we legally, I would need to look into the legality of that. But we can find that out.
Thanks.
Is this a specific concern to utility that we couldn't waive interest?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, like we have discussed the emergency ordinance that would suspend penalties for late payment for property tax. We've talked about in here suspending late fees for any non-optional services. Why is there a legal concern with the utilities?
Angela, do you want to? So each type of bill we have has a different enabling legislation. And we just want to make sure that in each enabling, whether it's an ordinance or a charter or a statute, that if we're going to change what's in there, we're doing it in the right way.
Yeah.
I think off the cuff, I think our utility interest rates are more flexible than our property tax payment rate structure. So I think we can do it. I just don't know how. I would need to do some research. We would need to do some research on how we would ask you to do that.
Yeah, because
do you know that off the top of your head?
I don't know off the top of my head, but for the property taxes, we're talking about waiving the penalty side, but one of the things that we're not able to waive is the interest side. It may be similar for the utility if we're using the same legislation.
Jesse, we discussed that, right? With property taxes, interest being waived would have to go through the state legislature. Is that right?
Yes.
So I do want to say there's the general idea with each of these items is that these are things that the city has some authority over, and we are trying to give people a buffer so that if they are financially strained right now, we are, ideally, we'll have to confirm this, not doing shutoffs, not doing penalties, not accruing interest, like not penalizing people and allowing them if they need to pay later. To the point about pushing out due dates, I think that's something that's up for consideration. The general idea, I think, even beyond the scope of us and the city, is if you can continue to pay, you should. But if you cannot, we are offering you some relief there. There is that approach. If we just are able to waive any sort of penalties, pushing back the date, I think might have a more psychological impact of relieving the pressure for somebody who is concerned about that, versus my bill is due May 15th. I won't get penalized if I'm late on it, but it bothers me internally to be late on it, or I'm not even sure if that's true. I think it's more of the way the person experiences it.
Can the similar to can the Board of Civil Authority approve abatement of interest from unpaid taxes and fees?
The Board of Civil Authority can, yes.
Okay. I'm fine with either approach, to be honest. If I agree with you, Chris, with Madam Mayor, there's definitely there's something better about being told that you have longer to pay than being told it's fine if you're late, we'll forgive everything about it. If those are different. So I think if people are more comfortable with pushing back the due date for the water and sewer, I think that's fine. I think either way, providing that relief so people have more time to pay is the most important thing. I do like the idea of having indicators earlier on of where we are going to fall in the next couple of months, but that shouldn't be at the expense of people's security and ability to feel good about what they are able to do. So I can go forward with either path.
I have to agree, especially for, I'm looking out for the people that are out of work, such as myself, the sole proprietors, the people who cut hair. Some of us are in constant contact with unemployment and these other loans that are out there, but it's nearly impossible to get through to anyone right now. So that's money may be coming in, but it may not come in until later on in the summer. So I think that's a good idea. I think we should be able to delay them.
So I found the enabling legislation for our water and sewer penalty and interest, and it is within our city ordinances, so we can change that by ordinance.
And how would the city feel promoting a, I guess I'm thinking that there is some portion of our city that can pay on schedule. And so however much we can contribute at the time that things are due, I guess I don't know how the city feels about messaging that out as part of our outreach around this, that we're making it possible to pay late, but if you can pay on time, it helps the city overall. Is that a feasible messaging strategy or something you'd be able to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think, sorry, Christine, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to put it out there that I can imagine a lot of folks, at least when it comes to property taxes, that is like in escrow in there with their bank anyway, and that's going to get paid on May 15th as usual, despite us pushing back a deadline. So I could see a lot of that coming in just because it's already in place. And I also, you know, when we think about the communications and daily COVID updates, I think that is a line of messaging that we can include overall, that if you can pay, right? Similar to how we're saying, like, if you can afford to donate to the food shelf, if you can help out your neighbors, like if you are not financially distressed at this time, that is something that you can or should do. And I don't think that is something that would be negatively received.
I'd agree. Yep.
Are there any items in here that concern folks? Are we generally on board with these proposals? We haven't, so we do have after this on the agenda a discussion about our small business loan program as another sort of policy and relief option. And we also have this drafted resolution, the idea being that we are limited in what we can control at the local level, and so we want to use our voice to push state and federal authorities to provide some of the relief that we cannot. I had drafted that to try to cover the scope of things that we would like to see but cannot control, with the idea of sharing that with you know, our state legislature and representatives, our congressional delegation. I would also share it directly with the Mayor's Coalition and VLCT, just as an example of, you know, something that what we are advocating for, so that others can see that too. Are there any questions or concerns on the resolution as drafted? Jim?
I just want to say thanks for putting it together. I was happy to see the kind of level of consideration for a lot of different sectors of our community. So I think it was a great compilation of what we should be asking our legislators for. And it raised one that maybe should have come up in the operational piece. So I'm putting it out there, but I don't know if this is the right time. I did hear from one resident about not having any real direct guidance from their landlords about any sort of leniency that they might be able to offer. So dealing with a landlord in the city and not being made aware if there is any sort of opportunity for like later payments or anything like that. So I don't know what we can do with that locally, but if there is any way to work with our landlords in the city to, if they have flexibility or ability to be sensitive to needs of certain renters who may have lost income and are in that in-between time of getting payments and not being able to make their payments, I don't know if that has been covered by your conversations with other mayors, or if, do you think this legislation and the kind of order from the Chittenden County Judiciary is enough, or what, if anything else, we can do around kind of encouraging or supporting landlords to support renters?
So there is the Chittenden County order for a stay on evictions and foreclosures while the judiciary is under an emergency order. We have heard from some of the larger landlords here in Winooski that they are being flexible. They are, well, I won't say that they said that they communicated that to tenants. I think they did. And then in the federal legislation, any property that receives any federal funding is stayed from moratorium or eviction or foreclosure. So I think that probably covers a lot of rental properties in our city. We have done a little bit of communication in that on that topic in the daily COVID update. I do wonder if there's a mechanism. Are there communications going out to our rental registry that we could jump on? Do we typically push out communication to landlords that are registered with us?
We do so in the kind of the billing cycles of things. We have, issued surveys through the landlord registry. I would ask Heather or Audie if you guys have opinions about pushing out other guidance about leniency or whatnot, to Christine's question.
I would suggest when we did the water bills, we could do a piece in there for landlords. Currently, we could do it through the landlord registry, but typically we only reach out to them once a year. So I know in the past we've done stuffers in the water bills or that sort of thing, and that would obviously hit all the landlords.
I think, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I like the water bill idea. I think there's that could be a space to message to anyone receiving that. There's the landlord perspective, but also as a tenant, I should be willing to reach out to my landlord, or even as a property owner, my lender, and see what potentially flexibility I have available to me.
And I know a couple calls that we have gotten. One today, Vermont Tenants is doing just that. They're encouraging the tenants to, these tenants are reaching out to Vermont Tenants to try to get legal advice, and they are telling them you first need to contact your landlords. And I think any of the landlords that they're having contact with, meaning Vermont Tenants, is telling landlords, look, the general practice here is we're encouraging your tenants to put you on notice that they're having a hard time. And, I'm here. I heard back from the person who called me with a concern, who had then reached out to his landlord and said, I appreciate you answering your phone. He's like, but I'm all set talking. I've spoken to the landlord and I'm all set. So I think that avenue for now is working.
I was just going to say that I think we have to be really cognizant of the fact that in Winooski, we have a large percentage of duplex owner occupants who rely on that rent in order to be able to pay their mortgages. So there are two sides to this. So before we really quickly jump into taking a position, supporting the renter, you have to consider the fact that the renter and the owner occupant could end up put out if that isn't paid. So I have spoken with renters and encouraged them to have the conversation with their landlord. And, it's obviously in the best interest of the property owner to work with a tenant rather than ending up without a tenant to pay that rent. So I think it's a complex issue in our community, especially considering the large number of renters that we have and the large number of owner occupants.
I will take a pause and open this conversation up to public comment, see if there is any.
Ray, we lost our littlest public commenter.
Probably best at this hour of the night that they left before the microphone was turned on.
So hearing no public comment, it sounds to me like we're at a point where we could move forward with some of these items. We have this on as discussion approval. I would like to separate out the resolution for approval. I think the sooner that we can get that messaging pushed out, the better. So I think we could take that for an approval. As far as property taxes and tax sale, we would have to come back with an emergency ordinance. So that's something that we can bring back to the April 20th meeting. The water sewer shutoffs and fees and penalties collections. Is that something that Jesse, that you would recommend we take a vote on now, or hold that for April 20 as well?
I think you could hold that for April 20 as well. And the shutoffs are really an administrative call. So I just wanted to check in with you all. I'm not sure it even needs a formal vote. It's more are we going in the right direction? I think more aligned to kind of the conversation Jim was having about what is the council's overall appetite to make financial changes, and what's the intention behind that, and then let us put together kind of the series of here's the decisions we would make and align to that intention. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be, I think what I've heard is bring you back emergency ordinance on the property taxes and tax sales, give you and the interest on the water, wastewater. And then give you recommendations on the other items, but do look at, because it has some urgency, one, messaging, starting to put out messaging now about if you can pay, please do. And two, putting the delayed payment date on the fourth quarter water bills. That's what I heard as some consensus.
That sounds right.
Around.
So if there's not further question or comment, then I would like to take a vote on the resolution. Jim?
All right, Christine. But I guess I just wanted to, I've been feeling a little bit like this meeting has been a long time in coming, and waiting another 2 weeks to make that call to put the certainty for people that they will have time to pay their property taxes and water bills. Well, it sounds like we can do that administratively, but at least on the property taxes, I'm wondering if we need to act on those emergency ordinances faster. It may not be possible, but I'm just throwing that out there. Something that's been on my mind is how quickly can we move versus how quickly should we move?
Well, while maybe we don't approve an emergency ordinance until our next meeting in 2 weeks, we could message that this discussion took place and this is the direction we are going.
I mean, I guess I would, I would look to the group as a whole. I think if there's some interest in moving this faster, I think staff could draft emergency ordinances this week, and you could have a special meeting next week. I don't think we bring you more expanded modeling or anything like that. I think it would be for the purposes of considering these two specific ordinances.
I personally would be in favor of a fairly short meeting to enact on the things that we all have intention to do anyways, if that's feasible, but I don't want to put undue burden on staff because there's already so much burden. So it's really, if no one else is feeling particularly urgent on that, I'm fine with waiting 2 weeks.
I think I'm fine with waiting 2 weeks. and doing what Christine said of messaging it now and letting the public know we've been talking about this, we're thinking about you, here are some of the steps that we're going to be taking in the future. And then they would still have about a month before the property taxes would be due. So to me, that feels like enough time.
I agree. I think giving it some time to our next meeting and messaging it would be appropriate.
As I do. Are we gonna, is the people that are burdened with financial hardships right now, are we gonna have them show some proof in order for them? Or are we gonna expect people that are still working, that still can pay their bills, to pay them on time? Or is this gonna go for everybody? Because someone that can afford to pay their tax bill or the water bill and decides that, well, they're given a delay, why can't I have that delay? Are we gonna have some language that people that are still functioning properly and working, are we going to have some different approach to that? They should be paying their bills instead of waiting to pay, like the people that are experiencing financial burden on this?
So I think that is the messaging we share, is that we have put these measures in place to support people with a financial burden. I think this is available to anyone who feels the need to take it. But again, I don't think somebody who's not experiencing financial burden is not going to just pay on schedule. Like I said, I think most people have their taxes set up through their bank already with their mortgage, and this is just going to happen on schedule as is.
And just add one more sentence to that. I think we need to assume that we're treating everybody the same way. So the messaging certainly could be, if you are able, please do pay to support your essential services. But I don't think we want to get into a position of, if you're not going to pay or you're going to pay late without interest, you have to show verification. I think that puts up way too many. Well, one, I think we can't treat people unequally like that. And two, I think it just puts up hurdles for folks that may be struggling that we don't need to put in their way. Does that answer your question, Mike?
Yeah, I think, okay, I'm with that.
So I think we have our next steps here for staff. And in that case, I would entertain a motion to approve the resolution as drafted.
So moved.
Second.
Excuse me. Motion by Hal, second by Mike. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you.
Hey, Jesse, quick question. Are you expected us to come in and sign these documents that we're approving, or how's that going to work?
Yeah, that's a great question, Michael. Technically, no, I don't think we're expecting you to come in. There is a way, and Janet, correct me if I'm wrong, that we can essentially type your signature with a special symbol that shows that you've signed it by vote. And then if somebody ever questions it, attach the minutes from this meeting saying that you have approved it. I see Janet's head nodding.
It's a good question.
Good question.
So let's move on to our next item, which is revision to small business loan program.
Oh, sorry, Christine, may I interrupt you quickly?
Yeah.
So I had asked the full leadership team to be here for that conversation because we knew that this meeting was a long time coming and we wanted to have all the experts here to answer any questions you had. But given how hard everyone's working, for those of you who don't have other agenda items later on the agenda, if you want to go be with your families, I am fine with that. So sorry, Christine, just wanted to direct. Bye, Eric.
Okay,
Well, actually, I was just going to say, on that note, I would actually like us to take a 2-minute recess. So I think we could have another solid hour ahead of us. So we can reconvene at 7:37. Amy or Hal, are you back yet? I see Hal. All right. 7:38. Let's reconvene with our revision to Winooski Small Business Loan Program agenda item.
Okay, thank you very much for your patience as I try to get together a revision to our Winooski Small Business Loan, and I apologize for the change to your materials. I had some information on Wednesday, and that changed entirely on Friday, so that's why the new memo to you. I've been working with the Opportunities Credit Union, which holds and services our Winooski Small Business Loan Program funds, to come up with an addendum to our Memorandum of Understanding to create a Tier 4 COVID Relief Emergency Loan Program. And I've provided that MOU to you. I sent that to you today by email. I hope you all received that. Basically, what I am proposing is that we establish, we take $200,000 of our existing Winooski Small Business Loan Program, which is the vast majority of those funds, and repurpose them as a response to the profound impact that COVID-19 is having on our small businesses. What I'm proposing to do is create a program that allows businesses to apply for up to $10,000 to be paid off a maximum of 5 years, with the first 4 months of payments deferred by Opportunities Credit Union, and an interest rate buy down by the city to 0% interest for the first 24 months of the program. So with $200,000, we are really looking at $10,000 each, 20 loans, which is incredibly small and won't be able to help everyone that's going to need help, but it is the funding that we have available. The interest rate is a reduced rate from Opportunities Credit Union. They've actually been unbelievably responsive. I've worked with Tim Carpenter and the new CEO, Kate Laud, and they have both been all over assisting me in getting this done, despite the fact that they're in the midst of trying to figure out a whole bunch of new relief loans that they are putting out as well. So I really appreciate them partnering in the way that they have, offering us this lower interest rate, so it will have less impact to the small business loan program itself, as well as be the deferral of the first 4 months of payments. So it gives some leeway to the businesses that really desperately need it right now, particularly when they're under mandatory closure. So I have provided you basically a breakdown of what the definite cost to the program will be and some possible projected losses to the program based on different percentages of defaults. And I do expect that we will have defaults through this program as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions about this. I hope you've all had time to review it, and happy to go over the numbers in more detail if any of you would like.
Thanks, Heather. I did want to get some clarity in the numbers. So in the, I believe I am looking at the updated memo. Is the total, so the realistic default rate, for example, shows 40,000 plus 9,283 cents. So 40,000 is the loss for the default. Is the 9,200?
It's the remaining interest. So what happens when a loan defaults is they no longer accrue interest on that loan. So we wouldn't owe the remainder of that interest. So I've multiplied it by the default rate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so there's the default cost, potentially 49,000. And then we have this additional 17,355, which would be the cost of us buying down the interest anyway.
The 17, actually, that is a confusing piece of it. That initial number, the 17, I don't have it right in front of me. I don't know why. 17,355.59 is if there's 0 defaults. So that,
I see. Okay.
That assumes that we've paid all of the interest. So the absolute definite costs without those months 8 through 24 interest, because we don't know what the default rate will be, that is the $5,854.56. So that's the interest rate for months 1 through 7. And then it changes depending on default rate 8 through 24.
So we're going to, this fund is going to take a hit of between 17,000 and realistically 49,000 in an effort to preserve existing businesses versus holding this for new businesses to start later.
Correct. And I can't say enough how much more successful I believe we will be in supporting and keeping our current businesses than drawing in new businesses in this particular environment.
Can I just add a sentence to that as well? I think one of the ideas Heather had in this was that if we can bridge over this crisis with as many of our businesses as we can and come out stronger, specifically in the TIF district, we will then start seeing more payment to the CDC fund, and the CDC repayments could repopulate this fund. The council could take those dollars and allocate them to the small business loan fund. So it kind of, it's the time, like, sadly, the timing of all of this might work well. So do you know what I'm saying? Like we have a revenue, a one-time new revenue stream coming in that could replenish some of this for a short amount of time.
Are there criteria on how, we only have the potential to distribute 20 of these loans. We have more than 20 applications. What's the determining criteria for award?
I think what we're going to do is we're going to, I thought about that pretty extensively, various ways of doing it. and felt really uncomfortable with creating new winners and losers by doing that. So what I am sticking with is the evaluation criteria that was made part of the original Winooski small business loan, with one exception, and that would go through our committee that evaluates small business loans, that is already a standing committee. The one thing I would say is I might put a higher score on number of jobs retained in that. And I'd love your feedback on that. So the current criteria are fills previously vacant commercial space, improves previously deteriorated commercial space or property, creates jobs or retains jobs, assists businesses in complying with city code requirements, adds business types currently underrepresented or lacking in the city and desired by the community, and minority-owned business or women-owned businesses. And each of those criteria are scored. 0 does not meet criteria, 1 meets minimum level of criteria, or 2 meets high level of criteria. So I think what we'll do is we'll stick with the criteria that we had already established for this business loan program overall.
And Heather, how does the program define a small business? Are there certain parameters that they have to hit?
Well, a small business would have to be under 500 employees. That's just the definition of a small business. But in particular, what I've written into the MOU is for businesses that have experienced mandatory closures. So for example, you wouldn't have Twincraft that has been open and continuing to make soap the whole time applying for a loan like this. It would be more for businesses that have experienced closures, mandatory closures.
That would
And
include
do we have
reduction.
any?
Sorry, go ahead, Amy.
Sorry, Jim. Just curious about the federal small business loan program that's out there and how we think that this could potentially impact applicants that we might get, or if your instinct is that may not make a difference at this point.
I don't think it makes a difference. I think people will go for this. I think people will go for all of the funding that they could potentially be eligible for. One of the things that was really, really important to me about this program was getting money into business owners' hands as quickly as possible. And based on what I've been hearing, there are delays and people aren't understanding whether their applications have been processed. And banks aren't entirely sure how to process certain applications because the guidance hasn't really come out in a clear manner. So really the reason that I have this set up so that any business that's been in operation for at least 3 years is automatically eligible is to speed that process. So, as quickly as we can possibly get $10,000 into business owners' hands can help them to bridge that gap until they receive that future funding from the federal programs.
Jim, you had a question?
Well, I was going to ask about that overlap with the federal programs too. I mean, the Paycheck Protection Program is of 0.5% interest and fully forgivable, and the emergency disaster loans are 10,000 in 3 days, according to the way the legislation is written. And so I recognize there's administrative delays right now on that, but I guess I'm wondering and those, at least the Paycheck Protection Program expires at the end of June. So without additional action, that funding source is gone at the end of June. So how short is the time that we need this bridge versus when will this be better leveraged in a month and a half when businesses are no longer getting federal stimulus support? That's kind of a question I've had as reading this, is when is the right time to deploy this program? But as you say, if the issue is that that money has been allocated in legislation only, then and businesses can't access it now, I guess I can see the greater urgency for this. But between those two programs, the emergency disaster loans and the PPP, you haven't seen businesses able to get certainty on when those funds will come?
I actually have had I've had access to inside bank conversations about how they were going to roll this out, saying basically we have no ability to roll this out right now because we don't have proper guidance to roll this out. So while people have submitted applications to many lending institutions, those lending institutions have not submitted them yet in many cases. So that's just kind of some inside background information that I have received, and it concerns me deeply for how quickly people are going to be able to access this. In particular, some of our small businesses, you know, they had 3 weeks cash on hand. I don't want them to be tanking now, waiting for those funds to come in.
And how?
So, yes, I fully support this, and I just think we got to get this out the door. I mean, our small businesses are being crushed, and they can't wait on the feds because it's going to take whatever. And if we want to have them survive, we have to get this out as soon as possible. So I fully support it. I think it's a great use of the funds. And, you know, it's all a risk. It's all a roll of the dice. But I think it's the best thing we can do for our community at this point.
Perhaps this is a good time to open public comment since we have our Downtown Association director here.
Hi, I have a public comment. I think similar to Heather, have been listening to a lot of conversations with businesses who are feeling a little bit confident about the federal and other funding that's coming out, especially restaurants and other things. There is a lot of sort of this flood of support that seems to be coming, but the cash isn't there. So my 2 points that I want to make, besides the fact that I fully support this and the downtown organization supports this, is that I think a local show of support is super important for our Winooski businesses. Most of them, like Heather said, you know, supporting who is here now is one of the only ways that will ever attract new businesses too. This is unprecedented. This is a crazy situation. But I think this is, I mean, I'm not a council member, but I think this seems like a very reasonable use of funds. That being said, you know, the businesses really need cash now. And some of them have even said, well, I don't want to take on a loan because there's all this grant, quote unquote, money floating around, to Jim's point about sort of unrestricted funds, but nobody knows when they're coming. So the fact that there are these points in place that Heather has put in where there's not, you know, and obviously you can read the specifics, but that they won't have to pay back right away, and that the city will take on those months of payments and things. That is a huge, I think, show of support for the Winooski small business community. And I think that, you know, it's a bummer that there's not more slots, but I think just the fact that those slots are available, even to people that won't get them, it will just be that show that Winooski is trying something at the municipal level. Even though there's this big swell that it seems across the country, having that municipal support, hyper local support, is going to be incredibly important, just for the cash flow, but also for the morale boost, if that makes sense. So I just feel like it's really important, and I would encourage everyone to strongly consider this program.
Thank you, Meredith. Mike.
I think this is a great resource. Heather, are we, when applicants come to fill this paperwork out, how's this process going to work? Say a business that can't be open right now because it's deemed non-essential, for example, like a bar downtown Winooski, they don't serve food, so it's a social gathering place. They cannot do anything right now. Will that hurt their chances of getting a loan? Or will that increase their chances because they're not making any income right now to help pay for the rent or get some money started when they start up again for inventory? And
yeah, Mike, these are primarily for people like that who have been involuntarily shut down. It really is looking at, I think when I was thinking about criteria for it, which I did not choose to put in place beyond what's already there for the small business loan program, I was thinking about which businesses were closed first. So who's been out of business longer, who's had the biggest losses. You know, I think we really are targeting this to businesses that have had mandatory closures. So that would be bars and restaurants, that would be close contact businesses, and then it goes down to non-essential business. So, you know, we'll be considering that as we sit as a committee and have these discussions about who to fund. Does that answer your question, Mike?
It does, thank you.
Are there any other questions or concerns here? It sounds like we are ready to someone to make a motion to approve the revision to Winooski Small Business Loan Program.
So move. Second.
Motion by Hal, second by Mike. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have annual approval of local emergency management plan with Chief Audi.
So unrelated to what's going on currently, this is the annual update and your hopeful approval of the local emergency management plan. The last few weeks, we're kind of in the workflow to look at this document. We look at it annually and update it, try to add a little bit to it every year. Obviously, we've been a little busy. So what's in front of you is simply just updated from last year as far as staff changes, that sort of thing. So upon your approval, we submit it to the regional planning folks, who submit it to the state folks who get approved from FEMA. These documents, we're working in it during this pandemic. This is one of the first documents we kind of pulled off the shelf. And this document will guide us, will be part of, if we are successful in getting FEMA dollars, that's when these documents count. We have to have these approved. And so operationally they help, and then it helps, unfortunately, during these times, for us to go to FEMA or be part of the reimbursement pieces with FEMA.
So you're right. You might remember approving this last year. Annually, we have to do so. And it sounds like, based on the memo, there's no substantive operational changes, just some staff updates.
That's correct. Just updated on staff, on our staff changes, who got plugged into the EOC and phone numbers.
Are there any questions from council?
I got a question. You know, just thinking about COVID-19 and how it's completely changed our lives. In section 4, there's a paragraph about the public notice sites. And, you know, a lot of those right now under COVID are closed to the public. So just curious, if we were to have a disaster like that, where people are physically not allowed to go into these places, would we want to consider adding, you know, like a bulletin board or some other public place that we could designate these notices to?
So I would suggest that this next round, meaning next year, when you see this document, that the whole country, right, the whole nation will have experienced COVID, and these emergency plans, much like they were after 9/11, will be a completely different document. And this pandemic is, a building that's on fire, or a natural disaster, flooding, right? I mean, we can kind of predict what it is, and we can kind of pick points at where we're at. And this pandemic, you just don't know where it is. It changed from this morning when I looked at the information to now. And one of the biggest fights of this pandemic, one of the biggest things that everyone is struggling with, and we're so thankful to have Paul Sarn, is communicating what those changes are and what resources are. There's That's been one of the biggest tools that we can bring to this fight is how we're communicating with people. And it's endless. This whole team, we pay attention to it every day. I'm looking at this 7 days a week from all these different resources, and we're plugging, information through Jess, who's plugging it through Paul and through the rest of the team. And it's just a constant piece. And you nailed it, Amy. I think one of the biggest changes in this document will be in emergency planning, which we've never really had to deal with in my 30 years, is how we communicate during these types of emergencies. So this document will look different next year.
Thank you.
Can I make one quick suggestion to Amy's comment? And just to be clear about what we're currently doing, because Amy, you bring up a really important thing about our current public notices being out of compliance because they're on the bulletin board in City Hall. We've actually moved those. Janet and Carol got way ahead of this and moved them to the windows of the 2 locations. So while they're not in the buildings, they're visible from outside. So I think we could accomplish the same thing in this document if we just take off the outside council chambers and outside the vault in that section, John. And I think that gets to your point, Amy.
Yeah, that's simple enough. We can take that step.
Any other questions, comments? I don't believe we have any public comment. So I would entertain a motion to approve the local emergency management plan with the minor text change to the public noticing.
So moved. Mike?
Second by Jim.
Motion by Mike, second by Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. I do want to thank you all for making your ayes sequential and not simultaneous so that we can tell what voting is happening.
Christine, if I can interrupt for just a quick minute before we move on, I do want to just acknowledge Chief Audie, not for this document, but also just for his leadership as the emergency management coordinator in the last month. As he just said, he has been 7 days a week watching the information that's coming out of the governor's office, coming out of public safety department. He has been a rock star, has been very clear in his communication, really educated the rest of us and his team on emergency operation centers and what we need to be doing very quickly. So want you all to know that you are in very good hands with him as your emergency management coordinator. Thank you for indulging me.
Yeah, the situation and the responses are changing so rapidly. And you have all been doing a good job adjusting and being flexible and trying to keep us all up to date. So well said, Jesse. Thank you. We will bring Heather forward again for our housing goal update discussion.
Hello again, all. This is our 3rd goal update on housing, and there's not a ton to report here. I will say that I have made everything into proceeding, but slower than planned, just based on the COVID-19 situation and the Housing Commission meetings being suspended currently. So we did not have our March meeting, and I don't yet know how we will be going forward in April. I think the way that I'd like to approach this is ask if you have any questions you'd like to hear from me about.
I do have one question, Heather. There's a note in here about the commission wanting to discuss potential changes to the trust fund in light of the firehouse data. Mm-hmm. Can you share any more details on what the data is or the change that they would be considering?
One of the things that was of concern to the commission was that when we looked at firehouse data, I think there were something like 32 renter complaints, which the commission thought was an unbelievably low number. And so there were some concerns that renters may be intimidated or afraid to submit complaints for a variety of reasons. And they wanted to look at, are there ways that we can make renters feel secure in advocating for fixes of code compliance issues in their rental units? So we had John Audie scheduled to come and meet with us in our March meeting, but we did not have a March meeting. So that's kind of on hold at the moment, but it was something that was discussed. And Jim, please add if there's something you'd like to add to that. You were there as well.
I will, thanks for that. And I'll just add to that, as somebody who rented in Winooski just a few years back, I didn't know that that was a thing I could do or how to do it. So I think there could be just some lack of knowledge as well at play.
Absolutely.
I think everything else in this memo was not a surprise. Are there questions from anyone else? No public comment. We can move on then to the annual gentrification monitoring report, please.
Again, I'm going to keep this short and sweet and take any questions that anyone may have. Once again, I think this is the third or fourth gentrification monitoring report that I have done. I've been doing them since August of 2017 in response to the 2016 Housing Needs Assessment recommendation that we invest in gentrification monitoring. So I've included in your packet an explanation of how municipalities are determined to be eligible for gentrification and how they meet criteria for gentrification. I look at indicators that include changes to median income, home value. I've added gross rent, which isn't normally part of the determination of gentrification, but since we have such a high percentage of renter households in our community, I look at that. A growing renter homeowner disparity, increasing educational attainment, decreasing poverty, which may represent displacement, the number of luxury versus affordable apartments, high wage versus low wage industries, and increase in white only population. Based on having looked through these indicators, we are seeing a couple of the indicators being met. We are seeing an increase in median income in Winooski. We do not meet gentrification definition because we are not seeing an increase in median income concurrent with an increase in home value and gross rent in the top third of municipalities in Chittenden County. So we don't meet gentrification criteria. We continue to see growth in educational attainment, and we do have a high renter, we're seeing increasing renter versus homeowner disparity, although that remains lower than in the county as a whole. So I think that's a summary of it. Again, this shows no indication that we are gentrifying. There are a couple indicators that I will continue to watch, and I recommend that we continue doing this on an annual basis.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing the where it's a trend we have seen before. That's helpful to consider over time. Any questions from council? Jim?
I just curious, not on like can we start doing this, but more on like the what would it take level to improve or shift some of the data sources, because one of the commission discussions was around the problematic part of using the ACE, the American Community Survey, for year-over-year change as their 5-year averages. So comparing 2017 and 2018 is really comparing 2012 dropping off and 2018 being added. Do you have a sense that we have options to start thinking about a more local approach to data collection that could support these types of monitoring so that we can be more reactive to kind of near-term change rather than long-term trend change?
I think I would be perfectly happy to look at that. I don't know that we have consistent data sources that we could compare across municipalities in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things that's problematic. And, you know, some of the data that I had looked at per the request of the Housing Commission, change in home sales, it was such a very, very small percentage of the total homes in Winooski that to extrapolate that across the entire community, it just would have statistical unreliability in a way that's even worse than the census data. So I would definitely be interested in looking at other ways we could do this, but I don't know how we would do that, normalize that data across municipalities because they have different sources of collecting data.
Okay, thanks.
Open suggestions on that though. And anyone who has ideas about how that might be done better, please feel free to shoot me an email about that. And we can definitely have that conversation and see if it's something that I can look at across the county and be able to compare.
Any other questions or comments? This item is on for discussion, so there's no action needed. And this brings us to the end of our agenda. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Jim, second by Amy. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Wait, Mike, did you vote?
I was on mute. I'm sorry. Aye.
Okay, motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you all. This actually, I think, went pretty smoothly for our first fully remote meeting.